Aloha mai kako, and welcome to this session of Brown Bag Biography, the longest running seminar series at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Uh, it started with the establishment of the Center for Biographical Research, which was 1987. So today's talk is number 761.
Wow.
We do these every single semester. If you want to find out more information about upcoming events, I'll tell you about one. But if you'd like to find out what's up for the rest of the semester, I think Zoe will put the link in. Yes. And there they are. You can follow us on Twitter. The whole range is there. These always take place at 12 o'clock on Thursdays to 1:15. Before I introduce our speaker today, I just want to mention the presentation we're going to have next week, which is entitled Roots and Routes Along Keaukaha's Seashore, Dialectic Repertoires of Place. This is with Helena Kapuni Reynolds. And what he's going to be talking about is has a very, very strong archival and preservation focus. He is in the American Studies program and doing the doctorate, and has just recently been chairing and organizing various conferences about archives and preservations. And he's going to be talking about this. He's written about this, among other places, in the Detours volume, the Decolonial Tour Guide of Hawaii. And he will be talking specifically about a place that is very near and dear to him, his own Onehanau in Keaukaha. So we're very much looking forward to that, and that'll be next week. Okay, now just a couple of things about the format here. Zoe has already put up the material. If you'd like more information about what we're doing, you can join the mailing list, or you can follow us on a number of the social media materials there. We have switched over. This is our third brown bag that is being done virtually. All the previous ones were done face-to-face. And what happened last semester was we stopped the series around March 13th, but we really felt it was important to keep it going again. And we've been very, very happy and are again today with the amount of turnout and the amount of interest. So it seems people still are very much interested in these kinds of topics. Because of issues having to do with security and various other matters, also including the recording, because this will be available on Facebook. The actual presentation will be available on Facebook in the future, and we'll be advertising different ways that you can have access to that. Because of that, issues having to do with permissions and issues also having to do with sort of security, and many of you I know have probably heard horror stories about Zoom meetings or public virtual meetings being hijacked in various ways. The way we're going to be handling this is that Zoe will basically have control over the screen, and what will happen when we will have time for questions and answers, but what we would like you to do, rather than turning people's microphones on, which among other things would mean we would have to get permission from you for your participation in the recording and various other things, if you have questions or issues you would like discussed, if you would type that into the chat box, and then I will read that out loud so that everybody can hear it, including our discussant, and then it will be answered that way. We are still trying to work out the best way to make this as much of an open or more of an open forum, but for right now, this is the best way that we can actually maintain security and safety for everybody participating. Okay. Our speaker today is Laura McGuire, who is in the department, the UHM School of Architecture. She's an architecture and design historian. Her current research focuses on migrants and refugees from Central Europe to the United States from the interwar period until mid-century. In addition to her work on Alfred Preis, which she's going to be talking about today, she has published extensively about the Austrian American architect and architectural theorist Friedrich Kiesler. More information about Dr. McGuire, along with a selection of her publications, can be found at https:// and I think Zoe could put that up probably as well in the chat. I found out about this project because I was very happy to see that Laura had received an NEH individual grant for this particular project. I had a particular interest in it because I have actually been teaching at the university long enough that I knew Alfred because I got very involved in the Literary Arts Council. And one of the sources of money for the Arts Council and the actual establishment of the Arts Council was part of the consequences of the establishment of the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, which Alfred was responsible for forming. So I met up with him in around 1980, 81 as somebody who was absolutely central to basically the whole concept of arts in Hawaii and one of its major movers. I then a little later on got tied in because he did a very extensive oral history, which among other things, dealt with the time that he was interned here in Hawaii, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Laura might talk a little bit about the irony that a person who was interned because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor designed the Pearl Harbor Memorial. I got involved with this because our center actually published that, part of that oral history in the book Talking Hawaii Story. And because I do some acting and whatever, I actually on a number of occasions was Alfred Preis reading that material. So I'm actually really familiar with that end. Now Laura is going to be talking about sort of what's in between. She's going to be talking about his career as an architect, but for a number of reasons, I was very interested to see she was doing this work, and I'm very, very happy that she's agreed to talk to us about it today. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Laura McGuire.
Thank you so much, Craig, for that lovely introduction. As Craig mentioned, I'm going to be actually focusing today, not so much on the Arizona Memorial, but actually what came in between. Alfred Preis was incredibly influential. He built well over 150 buildings on the islands, probably more, partly because he was involved in a lot of military housing projects. So he worked both as an architect and as a planner as well, and was an instrumental figure in the urban design development here in the 40s and 50s, for better or for worse. He had really good ideas, but no one listened to him. So we got the suburban sprawl that we're all familiar with today. And because he did do so many buildings, my talk is really primarily going to focus on his residences. Because it's through his residences that we can see this very interesting translation of his ideas derived from his homeland, which is Austria and Vienna, into the Hawaii context. So what I'm always interested in as a scholar of immigrants from Central Europe is the ways in which they brought their very Central European ideas to the United States and then translated them for this particular context or whatever context they were working in. And one of the things that I find tremendously interesting is that so many Central European architects moved to the United States and then they became regionalists. So rather than promoting the kind of broad international style modern movement along the lines of, say, a Walter Gropius or a Mies van der Rohe, architects like Alfred Preis and Richard Neutra and others tended towards trying to create a very place-based architecture depending on wherever it was that they ended up. And Preis is very much in this camp. So that's what I'm going to be showing you today. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. Where is it? There it is. Okay. And get a play from start. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. I'm going to delete all of the little videos here so I can focus on the presentation itself. So the title of my talk is The Mid-Century Architecture of Alfred Preis, an Austrian refugee and Hawaii regional modernist. And Alfred Preis came to Honolulu as a refugee from Nazi-occupied Austria, and he's definitely best known, of course, for his extremely elegant design of the USS Arizona Memorial at Pearl Harbor. But we're not actually going to talk about that building today. And that's because he was also a key figure in the development of a very distinctive Hawaii regional modernism at mid-century. And using ideas that he learned during his formative training in Vienna, Price was actually able to integrate very key elements of Austrian modernism into Hawaii and make it accord with both Hawaii's climates and its peoples. So this is not to discount his work on the Arizona Memorial at all. It's a very moving building about international reconciliation, and it's particularly poignant that it was built by a Jewish refugee. But in my mind, based on my research, it's really not wholly representative of his work on the islands. The Arizona was really a bold act of international modernism, whereas it turns out Price himself was much more of a regional based designer. So Price was an architect and a designer who was born into an ethnically Jewish, although highly assimilated family in Vienna, Austria in 1911. And when I say assimilated, many middle class, lower middle class Viennese Jews tended to not necessarily practice their Judaism. They considered themselves very much part of Austrian culture and Austrian society. And that was very much true of Price's family. His family was definitely lower middle class. His mother here in the center was a homemaker, and his father, pictured above, ran an automobile repair shop and a rental business, so an auto repair business from a little spot basically right within, right underneath their dwelling. And here is Alfred on the right with his younger brother Fritz. Fritz also managed to escape Vienna when the Nazis came to power. He ended up in Tennessee, and I've been able to get in touch with his granddaughter, which has been really great because she was the person who provided me with these family photos, which I otherwise would not have been able to get anywhere else. And they lived in Vienna's 4th district near the very famous Karlsplatz and Karlskirche, pictured here. And on the right is the Technical College, which is now Vienna's Technical University, where Alfred would attend school. They were also literally directly next to very notable Viennese modern buildings like Otto Wagner's Karlsplatz station. They were also not far from other highly significant and cutting-edge modernist buildings like Wagner's Postal Savings Bank, which is a building that all young architecture students become intensely familiar with in their survey classes. Now, Wagner, as an architect, was particularly known for his use of industrial materials as ornamentation in trying to keep up with the modern age. And Price was also quite close to Adolf Loos's Goldman and Salic store, which was a big men's department store, which was a revolutionary example of Vienna modernism, quite controversial for its time, known for its Spartan ornamentation, at least in contrast with earlier examples of Viennese Art Nouveau. Price also may have had a drink or two at Adolf Loos's American Bar, designed in 1908, which is perhaps one of the smallest bars in the world, but Loos managed to make it seem much bigger than it is through a use of mirrors around the top. So these sort of plays with space became part and parcel of Loos's work, and as we'll see, had a major impact on Price's design itself. So in Lowe's buildings, and we're looking at the Goldman Sachs store, the interior here, he pioneered a form of architecture which he called the Raum plan, or rather someone else called it the Raum plan, and then Lowe's agreed. In English, that means space plan. So in Lowe's Raum plan buildings, such as in the Goldman Sachs store, or in homes like the Villa Mahler, Lowe's created spaces with rooms articulated by changes in levels and spatial volumes. We see views of rooms that are framed here by pass-throughs and articulated by changes in floor levels. This is another shot of the Villa Mahler. It has been reupholstered in this somewhat odd shade of blue. But we see all of the ways in which Lowe's is playing with space. This is a relatively tight area, but he's articulated it with stairways, with screens, with lots of materials to segment the individual spaces from each other through ceiling articulation, through window placement, and other devices. So what could have been a very, simple room actually becomes an incredibly complex experience that is embodied with the idea of movement up and down throughout the space. In the Villa Müller, which is in Brunn in Czechoslovakia, it dates from the early 1930s, Lowe's attempted to create a new architecture of space, again, which he had begun in the Villa Müller and in the Goldman Sachs store, with rooms divided not by walls proper, but through changes in materials and changes in spatial volumes. So the exterior here is a white concrete box. But this veils the rich spatial complexity within. The windows, you'll note, are not arranged in any kind of classical order, but actually according to providing the best daylighting for the interior spaces. And this is something that is going to have a big effect on price. By using his Raum plan, or his space plan, Lowe's managed to interlock sections of space and connect them throughout the building with changes in levels, using stairs as pathways. And in the main living room, we see him using marble as a type of ornament, and this very kind of cubic space, which gives views into other areas of the house. So rather than an open plan, which is what we usually associate with modernism, Lowe's plan here is segmented. The spaces are still visually connected, but in highly unusual patterns. He managed to create very circuitous pathways throughout the house to link spaces. And he used variations in ceiling heights in order to maximize spatial richness and complexity, and all within relatively tight spaces. The whole Raum plan idea was, let's see how many volumes we can kind of squeeze into a tight space in creative ways. He also created incredibly unexpected moments with surprising pathways and what I like to call architectural reveals to pique curiosity. You see this door, you see the stairway, but you don't know where it leads. There's sort of a mystery behind design like this. Now, Lowe's and other Vienna modernists at this time in the 20s and 30s also heavily relied on very bold colors to create incredibly lively atmospheres. Now, in this case, it's a child's room. Bright colors seem fitting for young occupants, but he used bright colors in many other places, and that's something that we don't necessarily tend to associate with modernism. So Lowe's and others really strove to create spaces of rich and sensory interaction. This is one entry sequence to the Kuhner country house located right outside of Vienna in this incredibly bright green. And design moves like this created nuanced pathways throughout his buildings. And many Vienna modernists especially delighted in the architectural opportunities made possible by staircases and hallways to create these moments of unexpected delight that are enhanced with pass-throughs, little windows, and mirrors. And we'll definitely see the impact of this on Preis's Hawai'i designs. I always like to think there's kind of an M.C. Escher-esque quality to a lot of 1920s and 30s Vienna modernists. Now, Loos and other Vienna modernist spatial planning work of the 20s and 30s contrasted sharply with many German and French versions of open-planned modernism, such as the iconic Villa Savoie by Le Corbusier. And you might almost say that the Vienna modern designers were making buildings that were distinctly at odds with buildings like the Villa Savoie, or at least altering an alternative vision of what modern architecture could be. And of course, we have examples like Mies van der Rohe's famed Tugendhat Villa, also in the Czech Republic, with his very Spartan open plan. These kinds of forms, these open plans, would become very prevalent across the globe as the, quote, international style. Now, you can see some similarities here between Mies's work and Loos's work, which is not accidental. Loos was a generation older than Mies. And he was considered sort of one of the grandfathers of modern architectural design. And he was heavily revered by younger architects like Mies and Le Corbusier. So we see that same use of marble and texture and spots of color brought out. But the approach to space here is something significantly different. We see wide open vistas. Preis began his own architectural studies at the Technical College in Vienna. He originally had set his sights on becoming a theatrical designer, but he realized that being a set designer wouldn't really help him reach the middle-class lifestyle he wanted, and he had a sweetheart named Janina, who was a Russian Jewish immigrant to Vienna, and he wanted to be able to provide for her and to have a family. But of course, in 1938, right towards the end of Preis's architectural training, Adolf Hitler annexed Austria for Germany, and the first Nazi rally and Hitler's first speech actually happened about 10 minutes walk from Preis's family apartment. And after seeing all of his Jewish classmates and teachers expelled from the technical college, and especially the destructive events of Kristallnacht in November 1938, which we're seeing images of here, during which virtually every synagogue, hundreds of them, and Jewish businesses in Vienna were destroyed or burned to the ground, Preis and his fiancée, as ethnic Jews, even though assimilated Jews, realized that they were in great peril. So they began to make plans to escape. And unlike his other Jewish colleagues at the university, Preis was actually allowed to stay at the university and complete his degree, we think because he had converted to Catholicism, which was actually another common move among a lot of assimilated Vienna Jews, because once you were officially Christian, job opportunities tended to open up to you in ways that were not necessarily possible were you to remain listed on the Jewish register. So conversion was a really common practice. It was often kind of a business decision. In Preis's case, he was actually quite interested in Catholicism. I do believe he genuinely became a Christian, but he still maintained some connections to his Jewish roots. And so this was still in the early days of the Nazi annexation, before the Nazis went through every single name on the Jewish register in Vienna on which Preis appeared, even though he had been crossed out because he had converted. And of course, once they, undertook the purging more seriously, all of the listed Jews were rounded up and placed in ghettos and eventually deported to concentration camps. But Preis, seeing the need to escape and wanting to be an architect, wrote to at least 100 architecture firms in the United States looking for a job. And he received only one response from the Honolulu firm of Dahl and Conrad, who said basically, well, if you can get to Hawaii, we have a job waiting for you as a lead draftsman. And the story of their escape, this is the manifest of Queen Anne passengers. If you see towards the bottom, you can see Alfred Preis and Janina Preis listed on the passenger list. The story of their escape actually could be an entirely separate lecture. It was harrowing and it was incredibly lucky, to say the very least. You might note as well on this list that virtually everyone, Preis included, even though he had converted, is listed as Hebrew or Jewish. The enormity of the refugee situation on all of these departing boats is really hard to fathom today. And I went through all of the ship's roles for this particular voyage of the Queen Mary, and there were literally only a handful of non-Jewish people aboard. So this was just a mass exodus. Quite soon after his arrival, and owing to his talent, Preis was made a secondary partner in Dahl and Conrad. Now, Preis had arrived to Hawaii as an extremely frightened refugee. He was actually terrified upon his arrival that the Nazis had followed him. His car was broken into, his passport stolen, and he quite literally thought that the SS had followed him here. But after a while, he managed to feel more secure. And he brought with him as an architect thoroughly European ideas, influenced by Vienna modernism in the 20s and 30s. But for the first few years of his career with Dahl and Conrad, he also designed very streamlined commercial buildings and apartments that were influenced by US mainland trends towards this modernist streamlining. But in buildings like the Chok Pang office building in 1940, we can also see that he was drawing directly on his 1930s era Vienna modern sensibilities. This building looks like it could have been a modernist house, one even maybe by Los, plucked from a Vienna suburb and plopped right into Honolulu. He also strove to bring Adolf Loos's realm plan idea to Hawaii, most notably in his design for the Scudder-Gilmar residence in 1940 to 41. So we have here a very white box building with large glass openings on either side. We have this kind of streamlined parapet and this little porthole window, which in some ways is a little bit of an ode to Le Corbusier's Maison Citroën. But the interior of the building is absolutely Viennese and Losian in execution. Now, I have to say, too, that at the same time that he was designing his house, most of his family who had remained in Austria, all pictured here, were being systematically exterminated at Auschwitz and other camps. His mother, seen here in the middle, was sent to Riga. And was likely gassed to death on the way there. Riga was known for having vans that were outfitted as gas chambers, which murdered people on their transport to the concentration camp, so they were killed before they even arrived. And Price never really had a clear picture of what happened to his family because Nazi victims were not fully documented, nor were the records made available until much later. So we have to think, that this was something that was, deep within Price's psyche, not knowing what had happened to his family. He never talked about it, from what I can tell in interviews and to people who have met him. But we must imagine that he carried this with him at a very deep level and for the rest of his life. But getting back to the architecture, so this is not a Price house. This is actually a house designed by Adolf Loos in 1932 for a housing exhibition outside of Vienna. And we see these very Loosian kinds of elements where it's a tight space. It's a house for a small family where we have this beautiful staircase that goes up and kind of encircles the seating area. It goes up into a balcony that can be used for further living. And it also reminds us a little bit of his Kuhner villa with this second floor balcony with these railings and then this nice fireplace with seating around it. Now, if we take those two buildings and bring them together, we actually see something very close to what Price did in the Scudder-Gilmore residence, where we have this wrapping staircase, which is extremely Loosian in its execution. We see a fireplace not unlike the one at the Kuhner Villa, as well as this loft above with the colored railings that also very much reminds us of Loos. It also reminds us of Loos's balcony for the first house that I showed you. So there's a definite consonance between these two buildings. And I think this is very explicitly because in 1932, when this house was shown, Price would have been beginning his architecture studies. And absolutely everyone at the technical college who was an architecture student would have gone to see these buildings. So there's no doubt in my mind that Price actually used this as a model, a direct model for the Scudder-Gilmore residence. We also see that same idea of the balcony with the wing to the side, whereas in the Loos house, it's a seating area. Here in the Scudder-Gilmore residence, he's turned it into an art gallery for the family, but the consonance and form is really undeniable. One of the more interesting things about the Scudder-Gilmore house too is this stairway, which is particularly Loosian in flavor, not only because of the intense attention to craft in that hand railing, as well as the difference in colors. Loos was very, and Josef Frank and many other Viennese architects were very into creating contrasts in wood colors. But we see this incredible narrowness in this hallway, which is then lit with this little porthole window. Now, there's no explicit reason for this narrowness. The client actually had money and could have built a slightly larger house if she had wanted to. But here, Price was playing with that round plan idea. How much space can we fit into a house using different levels? And also devices that can be quite theatrical in effect, where you enter into this very narrow passage where your body is compressed, and then you come out here onto the balcony and you feel this incredible sense of physical relief. This is something that Viennese architects, when Price was training there, were very interested in. The effects of different spaces of compression and release on the way that people experience architecture. Now, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, when the US entered into the war, Price and his wife, as recent immigrants from Austria, were rounded up and interred for over 6 months as potential enemy aliens. But after their release, he went on to design numerous projects also forming a collaborative modernist architectural firm, Associated Architects, with Vladimir Osipov, among several others. And together, Preis and Osipov were really two of the instrumental figures in the development of Hawaii mid-century regionalism. And his post-war projects demonstrate on Preis's part a growing understanding of his new island home. And I think this is an area in which Osipov kind of nudged him along towards thinking more about indoor-outdoor design. Prior to World War II, Preis's aesthetic languages remained obviously dependent on Central European kinds of forms, as well as some mainland American idioms. But after the war, we start seeing Preis developing a better sense of the place and the climate that he is working in. So here on the lower right, Preis most likely designed the foyer for Bachman Hall at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. We see this very strong kind of European sensibility that actually contrasts slightly with Osipov's more regionalist planning. But together, you know, Preis is working towards getting somewhere a little different than he had been before the war. So as opposed to trying to import, you know, the international style modernism to Hawaii, Preis began to explore what Hawaii itself could bring to modernism, but filtered through his own Vienna design sensibilities. In the late 1940s and 1950s, really at the pinnacle of the homogenizing impulses of the international style, Preis turned markedly towards a local and tropical regionalism. And this was a rather radical proposition for a modernist architect. And his first landmark achievement of regional Hawaii modernism was the new Lapahoihoi School located on the northeastern coast of Hawaii Island. And it really represented a marked turn in his work away from Central European ideas and the international style writ large, and streamlining towards a specifically local aesthetic. Now, the school was built because on April 1st, 1946, a tsunami struck the area around Hilo Bay, along the Hamakua coast and the town of Lapahoihoi. All of this area was inundated. 25 people in the school were killed, including several students and teachers of the original school, which is pictured here. And the school, the destruction of the school was really a devastating loss for the plantation laborers community served. After the tsunami, the construction of a new school for this location was really a pressing case for the Hawaii government. And the final building cost was actually really high. It was around $850,000, which was a considerable amount of money for a rural school of only 515 students. But the governor at the time, Orrin Long, remarked that such an expenditure was justified since the school itself was a memorial to the 1946 tragedy. So here, Preis was tasked with a difficult proposition to build a school that was simultaneously a memorial, which is really a challenging design problem. Preis's design had a low profile. It was spread out lengthily across the hilltop. It hugged the irregular terrain in a kind of ribbon plan. And it stretched over a hill that was often very windy and very rainy. The facade itself was articulated with a very wide expanse of glass windows, still set in a grid-like pattern of mullions that makes us think of the international style. So here we see Preis still drawing on his predilection for European modernist idioms. However, all of that gridded glass was counterbalanced by a generous use of rough and earthy concrete with exposed volcanic aggregate. And throughout the building, Price used the trunks of ohia trees as structural supports. Now, ohia, as many of us know, is a significant tree in Native Hawaiian mythology and material culture, and it's prevalent across Hawaii Island, as well as the rest of the islands. And what's significant here too is that it's actually one of the first plants to be able to take root and thrive in fresh lava fields after a volcanic eruption. So the ohia columns, paired with those exposed areas of volcanic stone, forged a kind of poignant metaphorical connection to Hawaii's land. The juxtaposition evoked these ceaseless cycles of destruction and new life taking place during and after volcanic eruptions that had formed the island chain itself. So Price's choice of materials here actually very deftly evoked the memorial aspect of the new school. So the volcanic stone suggested life's termination, but the ohia tree, especially here, those narrow new growth columns, also represented its hopeful renewal. And the concrete with exposed lava rock aggregate, interestingly, was actually the result of a mistake. Price inadvertently specified lava aggregate that was significantly larger than what he initially intended. But he used this error as an opportunity to highlight the material qualities of the concrete. So after it was set, it was chipped away in irregular patterns, revealing the volcanic stones. And this made for a striking and very inexpensive aesthetic detailing. And this also relates to earlier Vienna modern ideas about using modern construction itself as decoration. Also in the spirit of constructive decoration, Price used these materials in the structure of the building itself for really innovative aesthetic effects. Here we see his butterfly roof, which is one of the things that he is known for, punctuated with these ohia columns and clear story windows at the top to provide adequate ventilation. There is totally natural climate control in this building, which we see in all areas of the school. We even see ventilation within these structures used for the school itself. In this case, bookshelves allow for airflow between the different parts of the building. Now, the classroom wings were separated by a central two-story concrete foyer, which led to an upper level core. This core held administrative offices, a community center, and a cafeteria. And these changes in levels and ceiling heights evoked Adolf Loos's Raumplan. Here, the interjection of this concrete wall adds complexity to an otherwise kind of mundane hallway space. It doesn't have to project or recede, but Price does that to make the space more spatially compelling. Now I realize I'm kind of running short on time here, but I just wanted to show some houses. After the war, Price actually worked on a lot of low-cost residential homes, in particular a complex in Palolo Valley called the Veterans Village, which was a co-op of veterans who came together and purchased land. And Price designed a series of houses that I think there was a choice of 3 different plans that you could choose. So he was very much one for social design. He wasn't a highfalutin architect who would only work for clients who gave him a lot of money. He was actually very interested in helping the regular person. But we see these kind of Pricean elements here with this punctuated use of color in what is otherwise was a very kind of typical Hawaii post-war home. Color again here in the stairways and in the railings. And also in the interior, his predilection for built-in furniture. Now, this is something that is coming directly from his Vienna experience as well. In some ways, outside of Frank Lloyd Wright, the Viennese pioneered modern kitchen design with the use of built-ins prominently. Adolf Loos himself put built-ins pretty much everywhere. There's a whole history of kitchen design here, which I don't have time to get into, but needless to say, this is definitely Viennese ideas coming through in an affordable and low-cost home. He also did a variety of other very middle-class homes, but tended to use very Viennese details, such as having a doorway that is not right front and center of the house, but is actually kind of tucked off to the side. This not only creates privacy, but it also creates more complexity to the procession as you move from the exterior to the interior of the house. So you physically have to make, with your body, all of these twists and turns to get into the house itself. And he also uses low-cost opportunities for aesthetic detailing. Here we just have brick, but he's turned the brick pieces in ways and joined them in a way to make ornamental patterning with color. Again, his interiors in this particular house have a lot of built-ins, these highly modern kitchens. Preis actually did a number of kitchen kind of newspaper commercials at this time, advocating for modern kitchens with built-ins that would make life better for the housewife. As well as using built-ins in many different places in the rooms themselves. So here again, there's an incredible spatial complexity. We see it in the way the ceiling is articulated. We also see it in the way that he's hiding little spots that people can use for storage. And then we see these other really interesting things that technically are totally unnecessary, such as this cutout in the ceiling. But it creates a spatial kind of dynamism that gives the room a character that goes beyond it being just a bedroom. And I want to talk now a little bit in more detail about the Lao House, which is the image that you saw behind me. If I had time, I would talk about a few more houses, but this is a house I've been working on rather extensively, and I think it's a wonderful example not only of this developing Hawaii regional modernism, which has to do with people and climate and culture, but it also particularly shows the way in which his Vienna design sensibilities are working into the development of regional modernism. So we have these very complex geometries, these wonderful canted windows that give broad views to the exterior, highlighting the garden, showing the tropicality of the place, but still the house is very low, it's horizontally disposed, and it's kind of tucked into the landscape, which is a move that very much respects the regional character of the environment itself. And we also see a lot of detailing here done, ornamental detailing, I would argue, in very low-cost materials in brick. Although this was not a particularly low-cost house in the scheme of Preis's design. This is just a slightly more up-close view of the entry sequence, which we'll see here. So coming into this house is an experience because you park in the driveway, and then you have to go around this planter and you have to turn to the right. You have to go up a set of stairs. You have to take another turn and then go up another set of stairs to reach onto the entry hall lanai. So there's an incredible sense of body interactivity in the movement throughout this building. Here you've reached the stairs. You're up on the exterior lanai. He's used bold colors here, this bright, bright red. The Laos were of Chinese descent. And this is another thing that we see working into his later houses, an acknowledgement of the design cultures of the people of Hawaii, who, like himself, are also immigrants. And what we end up seeing in a lot of his work is this really fascinating pairing of Asian design, whether it's through color or form, with ideas about Viennese spatial modernism. Here on the interior, we have this incredibly complex space. The house is actually designed in a V-shaped plan, where one wing of the V is the public area of the space. The other wing of the V is the private area of the space. And we have an open plan here, but in various places, your view is blocked. You can see into the living room, but the entry lanai kind of interrupts that view. We also see this use of color, this bright red on the ceiling and these bold lines of green that really enliven the space to evoke delight and texture. We also see in many areas of the house, Preis doing a very Losian thing, which is to give you glimpses of what's beyond, but not to actually reveal the whole thing. So there's a sense in which when you're in this house, you're invited to explore it. Also made possible through these very rich material contrasts. And he also incorporates the external environment into the house. Here in this really wonderful design move where he actually has the floor of the lanai kind of biomorphically penetrate into the house, dissolving that boundary between the exterior and the interior, which is something, of course, that other Hawaii modernists, such as Vladimir Osipov, become known for at this time. So Preis is also working in that idiom. I would say, though, that his is a slightly more controlled sensibility of indoor and outdoor. He very much wants to bring the environment in, but he does so with highly controlled views of it, such as the framing of the windows. It's not quite as indoor-outdoor, say, as some of Osipov's work is. Again, this controlled views of the exterior here with this canted window where he's giving you a glimpse of the outside, but he's doing it in a way that directs how you see it, which I think is really interesting. The other things that he's doing in the bookshelves is, rather than say, you know, an international style, straight horizontal lines everywhere, he's actually interrupting the horizontal lines at various places with these vertical members, which is something else that he's drawing to a certain extent on Asian design from. We also see him articulating spaces with changes here in levels. So we're looking at the view from the dining room into the living room, where we have this clear story above, and then above that, this bright turquoise ceiling, demarcating space according to the function of the space below. And here's a little bit of a better view of that. Plus, this Preisian signature, which is a door with a line, a vertical line directly through it. It was a little touch that he liked to add to most of his houses. And then here's a really fun thing. So this is an area where you are going into the, in that V, from the living part of the V into the private area. So he doesn't give you a direct line of sight. This is the stairwell going up to the private space, but he twists it. You're given a glimpse of what lies beyond, but you're definitely not given a full view. He plays with angles in these really creative ways and all these incredible juxtapositions between material and color. And this is one of the coolest rooms in the house. This is actually a guest room, and it's a six-sided room, believe it or not, where it's kind of tilted off at an angle. He uses a mirror in order to make a small space seem a lot larger, which plays on these kinds of optical illusions that a lot of Viennese designers were into in the 20s and 30s. And then he does this really wonderful cutaway of the ceiling where it's kind of this red brown below, and then this chartreuse biomorphic line above. But what that actually does is it serves to demarcate the sleeping area of the room from the dressing and work area of the room, where we see that little quadrilateral desk there done in glass. So he's using changes in levels to demarcate functional zones, but rather than in floor heights, which is something that Los might have done, he does it in changes in ceiling heights. And then as we move into the other private areas of the house, we see different uses of color, this continuation of these bold rectilinear geometries, as well as mirrors in order to reflect space to make it seem bigger than it is. As well as continuing uses of bold turquoises, this, turquoise carpeting with this lighter turquoise ceiling, which also incorporates a Japanese style shoji screen, as well as natural ventilation through clear story windows off to the side where you can control the airflow. So I'm going to stop there because I think I've probably gone over my half an hour. And there are a whole bunch of other buildings that I would love to show you, but we don't have time to do it today. But hopefully you will read our book. The book that I'm writing with Jack Gilmar and Don Hibbard, so you can get a sense of all of these many houses in much more detail. And I also want to promote a new initiative, which is an online exhibition, which will be being installed over the course of the next 2 or 3 months by myself and a professor from Cal Poly, Axel Pritchard Schmitzberger, who will be designing the exhibition with me. We'll be doing it by category, so public buildings and houses and things like that. If you're interested in learning more about Preis, that will be a great opportunity to do so. And I will share that information with all of you. If I can get an email list from Zoe, I'm happy to send you the web address. We are also planning a symposium on Alfred Preis for the spring, as well as in the fall, COVID allowing, an actual analog exhibition of his work, full of all of these wonderful photos, as well as hopefully some models designed by architecture students at Cal Poly that will give you a little bit of a sense of the kinds of spaces that he was creating. So I will stop there and wait for the Q&A. Thank you all very much.
And thank you very much, Laura. We do have our usual pattern is to make sure that we're done by 1:15 so that people have enough time to get to their next class. We're not in that mode anymore.
Sorry.
So, but we're still going to go to 1:15, and I would welcome any questions in the chat area. And here we are. We've got the first one. This is from Alex Bala, and he's asking, "Hi, Laura. Great to see you, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. In terms of temperature control, to what degree did Preis alter Raumplan to suit an environmental context that demands long and extensive spaces in order to allow for passive cooling and the breakup of interior heat islands? Does he also play with ceiling heights in other houses?"
That's actually a really good question. And it's something that I've grappled with myself. And from what I can tell, what Price tended to do was actually, so Adolf Loos's realm plans were stacked. You know, we have these high cubes of like 3 and 4 levels. So what Price essentially did was to horizontalize the realm plan. So we still have these spatial distinctions between variations in ceiling heights and in some cases floor heights, although less so. But he kind of flattens everything out. Almost everything is a single story in order to allow for clear story ventilation across the house. But we still definitely see zones demarcated by various planes and changes in levels. Yeah, but that's a great question.
Okay, and the next one, this is from Christopher Long. Laura, can you comment on the similarities with R.M. Schindler's houses?
Yeah, I think, I would say that one of a great similarity is one of Schindler's first houses, the King's Road House, in terms of the way that he uses material in order to evoke the regional context. I think that's something that Price himself was also extremely interested in. I think also the way that Price incorporates the environment, as I showed, but also controls it to a high degree, as opposed to someone like Neutra, where we have just these very open plans with views to the outside. I would say that Schindler offered much more controlled views of his exteriors. And the Schindler connection is actually something that I haven't gotten a chance to explore as much as I would like, but that's definitely a comparison that I should look more closely at.
All right, any other questions? Okay, while we're waiting to see if one comes in, I'd like to ask one.
Yeah, sure.
You said in our earlier, in our comments right before this, that you basically take a biographical approach to any of the work that you're doing. Could you talk a bit about that, the specific role of biography in relation to architecture? Because in different arts, for example, biography for painters is often ends up being a catalogue raisonné, or with I've talked to musician biographers where they basically say their fundamental purpose is to figure out what order the pieces were composed in so that the opus numbers are right. And I could go on a great length about what literary biographies do, but could you talk about how you found yourself as someone coming up through architecture or whatever, gravitating toward biography? Because I would guess you might have some company, but maybe not a lot.
Well, I can actually, and the instigator of this is here in this talk, Christopher Long, who is my dissertation advisor at University of Texas at Austin. I was interested in the architect Frederick Kiesler, and he said, biography is a good way to go because you have a protagonist. And you can explore issues surrounding architecture, both the architecture itself, but also the historical context in which that architect was working through someone's personal story. And I think it is a way to get at much larger issues than necessarily the history of the person themselves. I think in my own work, I tend to want to reach outwards from the person, using the person as a sort of case study to highlight many of the conversations that were going on in that person's world at that time. And, through doing biography where you have access to people's personal materials, hopefully, their letters, their works, their conversations with other people, it can give you an incredible view into the broader milieu. So I'd say that, I'm interested in Price as a human being and as a person, but I would say I'm more interested in how he came to be and what his work represents for the way that Hawaii in particular was developing within a built environment context at a broader level. And that's definitely the kind of thing I'm doing in my book. You know, I sort of zone in on Price and then I zone out to everything else that's going on that might have influenced him. And, you know, biography, I think, has come under fire in a lot of academic circles for some legitimate reasons. You know, the issue of, you know, highlighting famous white men through history is definitely one of them. And I'd say that, you know, biography is considered, at least in architectural history, a somewhat conservative approach in that broader discourse. But at the same time, I think it actually offers us a lot because we can see into all of those other issues, even the issues of, you know, white men controlling architecture through the story of a particular person. So.
The traditional way of talking about that approach is the life and times approach.
Yes.
More mundane way, what you do is, if you really want to write about a period, pick the person who is standing closest to the fan when everything hit it.
Yep.
Because it provides you with a perspective of an organization. But you frequently find that many people who use a biography, as you're pointing out, who use a biographical approach, use it as a means to an end. And yeah. And then, of course, the other thing I just say is that it's always wonderful. That's why we're an interdisciplinary field or whatever, because it's always wonderful to hear in different disciplines how little they have actually thought about biography when they're practicing it. Yeah. Because in fact, if you look in biography studies, you'll find out the critique of the great white man has been a major debate area. So they're dealing 40-year-old notions of biography, which maybe say more about their field than it does about biography. But anyway, yeah, and that's why we have these seminars and everything else. So one of the things really interesting, yeah, go ahead.
I think that the issue is, you know, not biography itself as a methodology. It's maybe rethinking what it can do, as opposed to, you know, the great white men of history. Are there other things that biography provides an opportunity for? And I think, at least in architecture, knowing several other people who write biographies, that's definitely a subject that is very much under discussion, as opposed to just, you know, catalogs of some guy's work. Doing more social history through that person's design. So the design itself is important, but what it says more broadly is even more important.
Yep, no disagreement. And biography is a wonderful way of getting at that. Any other questions from people? Okay, I'd just like to end by reminding people that there will be another session next week on Ke'okaha and issues of preservation there. From an autobiographical perspective, because that's where Helena is actually from. And I'd just like to, on behalf of everyone, thank Laura for a wonderful presentation about a man and buildings and a context. Thank you.